Good evening and welcome to Public Affairs Public Access on Houston Media Source TV. I'm Gene Preuss with the League of Women Voters of Houston, and I want to wish you a very happy new year. It's 2023. I'm saying it now because it'll probably be August before I get used to writing it down. And Merry Christmas. We haven't seen you since last year. So thank you for joining us tonight. If you would like to call in and have questions for us, 713 807 1794 is the number. And I want to tell you what we're going to be talking about tonight. I have two very good qualified guests and two very good friends, Dr. David Branham, Dr. William Flores, both political scientists, both professors of political science. So you have a lot of experience talking and evaluating and looking at trends. And I'm but a mere historian. And so we're going to be kind of crossing the line here. And we're going to talk about 2022 in review. What did we learn from the past? What were some of the big events? And how are we going to be talking about them in the future? What kind of impact are they going to have? And of course, we're not futurists. But sometimes these questions come up, and we're often asked, what does this mean? What is the import of this? We have two new political sessions about to start, one in Washington, D.C., one in Austin, Texas. In Washington, D.C., we're waiting to hear what's going to happen when the House finally decides on a speaker. And the last time we heard, they have not, which is in itself historic. The Texas session of the legislature meets every 2 years, meeting again in just a few weeks, and hopefully they won't have some of the same problems. Although I think, and maybe this is just personal bias, that our state house works a little bit better than the U.S.
In many
Congress.
ways, it does.
In many ways, it does. Yeah. So, well, thank you, gentlemen, both for being here with us, and to both of you, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Thank you, Gene. Same to you.
Happy New Year to you too as well.
So we've got a lot of topics to talk about, and we're going to cover them, not in depth. We're on many of these things. They happened very recently. We're not experts in all of these areas, but that's not going to stop us from having an opinion or making a comment because we're used to doing that. So how did some of these events affect us this year? So don't expect in-depth analysis. There's a bunch of things on these lists, and I've got 2 pages of data, of items. So we can't talk about them all, but we're going to cover some of them in the next hour. And again, if you'd like to call in, you're welcome to 713-807-1794. You may have a better opinion than we do, or a different opinion than we do. And I also want to thank Mark Pirtle, our director, because he started us off this evening with brand new music. Thank you very much, Mark. The artist is Thomas Avenger, and the piece that you heard that started us off today was called No Thank You, John. And it may be called No Thank You, John, but thank you, Mark, for bringing in that new piece of music. That's a nice way to start off the new year. So, gentlemen, let's start off with the national event, right? Because those are things that people are used to hearing about on the news. Maybe they've just turned off the news. They've heard about some of these things. One of the big headlines this past year, and is still continuing, is the war in Ukraine. Bill Flores, when is that going to end? What are we going to see? I mean, there's been some changes with Russia. What are we going to see?
I think the main lesson with there is that most of us assumed Russia, with all of its might, with its army, with its technology, that this would be over soon, and that the army that they brought in with all their equipment would take over the areas that Putin wanted, that he was claiming. That didn't happen. Certainly they came in, but the resistance and the leadership that has been provided, I think, surprised all of us. The other thing is that it shows the resilience of the Ukrainian people. Rather than give in and say, all right, you take this land. They said, no, we're going to stand up and defend it. And of course, many Ukrainians had to leave because they were being bombarded. So that also brought another issues where they're going to be able to be settled in Europe and where they're going to be accepted. And so it really, I think, shocked Putin to see, if anything, Europe became more united as a consequence. And there's been very strong support from the U.S. and from Europe for Ukraine.
David, what do you think?
I was one of those people who thought Russia would not have an easy road to hoe on this.
Okay.
And I did an interview on the Isaiah Factor right before the war started, and that's the first thing I said. I said, you know, Russia thinks this will be easy. It will not be easy. But that said, I had no idea of the resolve of the Ukrainian people. It's been amazing how much dedication they've had to this. I think Putin is really, he would be happy to settle for that eastern portion of Ukraine that he claims should be part of Russia. I think that's what he's going for, but he's not saying it out loud. I mean, it would be a bad thing for him to say it out loud. But his biggest problem is his own people. He seemed to think that Russians have this resolve to go to war and never stop fighting until it's over. And I mean, that resolve was there in World War II when they lost 22 million people. I mean, people don't realize how many people were lost in World War II by Russia. 22 million. I mean, we lost 6 million in the Holocaust. 22 million Russians. So they're tired. They're tired of losing their lives. Americans are too. They're just as tired as Americans are.
Is this going to be the end of Putin?
I don't see that on the immediate horizon. I don't see that, but he's more vulnerable than he was before. So it wouldn't shock me. It wouldn't shock me if something happened.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that there is many more tensions that are taking place and more space in Russia right now for criticism. And it's coming not just from people on the streets, and you're starting to see that, but also from some of his own members of his party. That hasn't happened before. But I don't think that it's going to end with Putin losing power. That could happen. When it comes to Russian politics, we never know. But I do think that it's going to force a realignment. You know, Putin was thinking this is going to be easy, it's going to be quick, and it can set up other expansion because other countries, especially former Soviet countries, will roll over. I think what it's done is it's not only united the resolve of Europe, it's also shown resistance in his own country and people willing to flee from Russia rather than stay in a country where if they remain, they may be drafted or they may be forced and compelled to go to war.
All right, new subject. And this is something I started off the show talking about this, and it's something that we're watching and trying to keep up on the news with right now. What has happened to the Republican Party? We saw them, the expected red wave that maybe a lot of media pundits were talking about, didn't occur. They lost some races they were expected. The so-called leader of the party has been challenged. The former president, right? We looked at the former president as the leader of the party, no matter whichever party they're coming from. Doesn't seem to be maintaining control as you would normally think. And the House right now can't elect a speaker. They've defeated him 5-6 ballots now.
10.
7.
Is it 10?
10?
10.
Oh, okay.
10 as
It
of
changes.
that.
It changes all the time, so
Yeah.
it's hard.
It was
to keep
7
up.
when I got in the car.
All right. So what? And we've talked about this before, David. What is the future of the Democratic Party. I'm sorry, the Republican Party.
Well, I mean, in all honesty, they mirror each other.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a very radical part of the Republican Party, and it's those 20 members of Congress who are voting against McCarthy right now. They are steadfast in what they're doing. Now, it's unprecedented in the last 100 years to do this, what they've done, and I don't think it's going to work. I don't think there's any chance that they're going to get what they want. As a matter of fact, I think it's time for McCarthy to start probably pulling the demands that they have back. It's hard enough to be the speaker without having to concede everything before you actually get the job. So I think he's going to pull back, and there is a possibility that there will be a coalition of Republicans and Democrats come together to elect a speaker. I think it's a real possibility. It happens in the Texas House all the time. It's a nonpartisan chamber. In the national government, it is partisan, but you have 20 people who are just dead set to blow this thing up, and I think there's 200 Republicans sitting there going, we're not going to have this, and we're going to figure out a way to get this done, and so that's going to be a problem for those 20 going forward.
Bill, do you think that he's going to pull his nomination, McCarthy, or is he going to keep going?
I don't know. I think it's going to be very difficult for McCarthy to, if anything, he's probably lost some support. Each time there have been people that have been sort of switching, but he's basically 19 or 20 people have consistently voted against him. I don't know. He may end up, winning, but I do think that the likelihood is somebody else will step forward and get support, and probably with the help of some Democrats.
Yeah, I think he's steadfast. If I had to guess, I would guess that he's going to get it eventually. But it's like arrow serum. I mean, if you lose support on one side, there's people on the other side who would like to have a few things coming their way that they wouldn't otherwise have, and that could mean a vote in their direction. And I don't think they're going to take McCarthy out. I personally don't think so. He has such strong support. When you have 200 people voting for you, that's a lot. And you got people like Jim Jordan, who the radicals want in there, who's saying, no, I'm not going to be speaker. I'm supporting McCarthy. I mean, that tells you that these people are out there on a ledge, and they're very vulnerable. And so I don't think these 20 are going to win in the end. I think that McCarthy will emerge, but you may be right. It's just a prediction on my part.
Right. Well, that's that's what we get paid the big dollars for on this show.
I don't know about that. I do think though
Make predictions.
that it's a dangerous time in our politics because we have, because of these cleavages within the majority party, and you have to say, are we going to see a Congress that is going to get things done? I'm sure that they'll find some things that people can unite around, but
hasn't
it may
that been
end
the
up with
problem?
more executive actions from.
I think the issue right now is they don't want anything to get done. The majority of them have no
I agree with you.
No agenda that they want to push forward that they think has a chance of success.
Okay, so
I agree with
So they're willing to sit around and do 10 votes
Yeah.
in 2 days, and let's make it 20 votes if we have to. And if that's what's making the news, I don't think they have anything on their agenda that they think, oh, this is pressing. We have to get this through and get it to the Senate where it'll get passed, and the president will sign it.
So
nothing
some of the issues we're going to talk about later on, this has been one of the problems, right? Congress has not acted. Congress has not. I mean, they are charged, right, with being lawmakers. That's what we call them, and over and over again, and both sides of the aisle share the blame for this.
Absolutely.
We are not seeing a lot come out of Congress, and we do see the president having to make decisions or other groups having to make decisions. Right?
There are plenty of people that are happy with that. Nothing coming out of Congress.
In the the last days of Congress, there were several bills that were passed, including the protection of marriage rights. But that those kinds of things are few and far between.
Right.
Well, that was a Democratic-led Congress. They had
Exactly,
Democratic
exactly.
majority in the House, pretty
But it was
much
a
a real
bipartisan,
Senate
right?
majority, a Democratic majority, and then the president. So those are things they could get signed and passed.
And the infrastructure bill.
That would never have happened with today's House members.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, you're not going to get a $1.7 trillion. You're going to get an infrastructure bill maybe if you need it, but it's not going to be a $1.7 trillion bill.
I agree.
You're not going to get a Protection of Marriage Act out of this House of Representatives.
All right, so let me transition to another thing that, bringing this up. You mentioned the Protection of Marriage Act, and this part of this was a response to what happened with the Dobbs versus Jackson decision by the Supreme Court overturning the 1970s case Roe v. Wade. And that has had tremendous ripples. Some people say it even contributed to the mollification of the red wave, right? That there were people on both sides, both political parties,
right.
women.
I agree with you. I think that definitely was the situation.
I mean, Dan Patrick said as much. He said, look, Democrats are upset. We've overturned Roe versus Wade. They're going to come out. It's going to be tough for us to win. That's what he said as soon as it come out. So it's not a surprise to me at all.
And there were people that crossed over who were Republican who said, look, I don't want to support this issue. Same thing in the LGBTQ community. They were saying, our rights may now be overturned if we don't get some laws passed. So.
All right. So let's skip down. We have a list here, so I'm going to skip down because there's a lot on here. And let's talk about civil rights. The Department of Education, their Civil Rights Office, has received in 2022 an uptick in complaints, but over half of them were from disabled students. Education, and we're all in education.
Mm-hmm.
Education and how we deal with students with disabilities or differently able students has changed tremendously. I had a student in my class, an older gentleman, African-American gentleman, and blind, legally blind. And so, of course, it made me very cognizant of the materials that I assigned. But one of the things he told me that, jabbed me in the gut. He said, when I was going to school, a blind black kid, the only future was at the end of a push broom. And that was the educational forecast for him.
How old was he, did you say?
He's in his 60s, 70s. Yeah. Not that much older than any of us.
Than me, yeah.
So today we wouldn't say that, right? We would, things have changed, but there's still a long way to go. What do we need to be looking for? Why are we seeing more and more complaints?
I think part of it is that the students that have disabilities, that a lot of them are not blind or are not in a wheelchair. The disabilities could be that they're on a spectrum. It could be that they have some visual problems, some acuity problems. The reality of it is that there are many more kinds of disabilities that we've become aware of. The difficulty, if you're a parent of a child who needs such services, you have to figure out and get that child tested, and the districts are not paying for that. So that puts a tremendous stress and a disadvantage particularly for lower and middle income families. I know this personally because we had to go through with my stepson a lot of testing, and it took 3 years before HISD actually processed the paperwork. In the course of that, we talked with all kinds of others that were in similar situations. So I've seen it firsthand. It's an immense problem. And it's also a complicated one because, like in the case of Houston and HISD, the TEA was basically saying, we're going to cap the number of students that you can list as qualifying under disability and receive state or federal dollars for. So what that meant, not just in HISD, but throughout the state, that students who were disabled, who had not received that classification, were not able to get it. So yeah, there are legal suits taking place because of real complicated and difficult situations.
So what you're saying is this is actually a good thing.
Yes.
This is a good thing
They were
because
seeing more complaints.
disabilities, there was as many disabilities back in the 1960s and 70s as there are now. But those children did not get any attention for that. They were sentenced to a life behind a broom. And so the fact that this is a problem is good, but the solution to it is not easy. I mean, we at the university encounter this in every class where we have students with disabilities that we have to make accommodations for, and it's a lot of work to do this. Because you have to. It's not just one accommodation for one student. It's several different accommodations with several different disabilities across the board. So the faculty have a lot of work to do to be able to cater to a student with a disability so that they can actually learn from their course. And so, am I saying it's bad that faculty have to do that? I'm saying no, but you have to put the resources in there. And Bill and I have both been administrators. It's hard for faculty to make those adjustments, and they do their best a lot of times, if they're snowed under, to not make those adjustments. So administrators have to stay on top of it. We have complaints, that's good. We have to have the infrastructure of the administration to say, okay, this student has a disability, this child has a disability, you will make that accommodation, and let's help you make that accommodation with some resources. Until you do that, this is going to be a bigger and bigger problem. It's such a big issue that this is what school board members run on constantly.
Sure.
If you see who wins school board elections, people with children with disabilities. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. If you have a child with disability, you need to be very, very aggressive. That's the lesson from this.
Well, and the sad thing is that unfortunately, as a result of COVID, we have all students who have suffered, but particularly students that were disabled and didn't get the technology support during COVID that they might have gotten had the university been open or the high school operating, because there wasn't somebody there to support them and get the technology to their house that would be available.
Yeah, the pandemic showed a lot of red flags that we weren't seeing before.
Absolutely.
I mean, just equipment, right? The things that we take for granted, like you have Wi-Fi in your house. A lot of students don't have Wi-Fi in their house.
Okay, let's talk about COVID.
Laptop.
So you're talking about two things that we've already learned from COVID. COVID, I mean, it wasn't just a big issue last year, but it was where we saw ourselves coming out from under it, at least. The expectations is this is going to be like the flu or any pneumonia. It's something we're going to be with forever now.
And that's not a bad thing. I mean, it's because there also our population has built up some resistance. One of the things I think that is a problem is that because of the politicization of the issue of whether you got a vaccine or didn't get a vaccine, whether you wore a mask or didn't wear a mask, I think that in many respects, COVID is just one of many kinds of pandemics that we may face in the future. And we unfortunately are not equipped to respond. If there is a more virulent form, not of COVID, but of some other kind of, bacteria or virus, we may not be equipped to respond. I think one of the great lessons was how rapidly scientists came forward, researchers came forward and developed vaccines, and that's been a great thing.
It's sad that this. I hear what you say, and it's sad that COVID is probably going to be with us, and that we're, and Bill's talking about possibility of other viruses. Unfortunately, that's the time we live in. That means there's a lot of uncertainty going ahead. So being prepared for uncertainty is very difficult. But what makes us great is our resilience in times of uncertainty.
Yeah, but that's the great irony, right? It's an oxymoron. We got to prepare for uncertainty, but we have to, right? If you have an opinion, if you think we're wrong about something,
Probably.
give us a call, 713-807-1794. This is the League of Women Voters of Houston, and we're talking about issues of the day. And I'm here with my two very good friends, Dr. William Flores, and Dr. David Branham. I say good friends. That's assuming a lot. Let's just go with that, okay?
It's not assuming anything.
Not at all. Not at all.
I'm just glad to hear him say it.
Okay. Texas. Let's focus. We talk about issues that have dealt with Texas, but let's specifically focus on some Texas issues.
You can talk about the Astros now.
We're going to get to that. Don't worry, I'm waiting.
We will, okay.
Okay. News reached us in 2022 from the Census Bureau that Hispanics are now the largest group in the state. Well, estimates. I mean, they haven't had a new official census the past couple of years. But over 40% of the population is Hispanic. Whites are only 39%, 39 and some change. Almost half of Texans are under 18 are Hispanics. So it's going to continue to grow. So here's let me throw this out too, because just to complicate the issue, and I saw we see this in the university and in institutions, and when people talk about it, we talk about African Americans, white Americans, Hispanic Americans, as if they're three different things. We silo them. However, in most of our families, in all three of our families, that's not the case, right? We have members of our family, an extended family, who are other ethnic groups, other races even. So we talk about Hispanics being the new majority, but are we still not looking at that as in that old-fashioned way of brown, black, white?
Well, I think it's the key issue is that we often make a mistake of thinking that demographics, changing population, and racial and ethnic populations, that's destiny, that things are unchanging, or that all blacks are going to vote the same, all Latinos are going to vote the same. First of all, the Hispanic community is not homogeneous, and it certainly doesn't vote the same. And I think if people just assume, the Latino population is rapidly becoming not just 40% will be 46%, 48%,
very quickly
50%.
Yes.
That all those are Democrats. That is not the case. And we saw that in the midterms, but the other is that's been going on for years, where Latinos vote based on issue and based on the Latinos in the cities are more Democrat than Latinos in the Rio Grande Valley are, and have been for
More
you know,
Democrat.
yeah,
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, it's the thing about Hispanic voters is they vary, and we discussed this
absolutely.
before. They vary a lot, and they don't mind changing their vote. And part of that is the experience that they have is minimal as far as politics goes, and that means when something new comes along that they see, it has a big effect. I mean, Republicans sing January 6th. They looked at January 6th, and all it did was increase their resolve in many cases to that we are conservative, we're Trump supporters, and so forth. If you're new in politics, or if you're young, and you see something new, it changes the way you see things. It doesn't. You're not hard, right? It goes back to a guy named Zoller. He wrote a book basically saying, look, you take in all these messages and you develop an ideology. If you're a new voter, if you're a young voter, and most Hispanics are, they're taking in this information, and they may change their mind because they see something, and so that's there. And so to assume they're all Democrat, like as Bill said, is just silly. It's not the case, but you need to assume that you have to fight for their vote. That's what you need to assume. And I would encourage anybody who wants to have power in the state of Texas to understand you have to fight for their vote, and that means putting them in leadership positions. That means voting for them at the polls. It means full-fledged participation and inclusion of the Hispanic community. If you don't have that, you will lose. And that's what the change that needs to be made.
And I agree with that. I think the other thing too is that the Democratic Party, particularly where the national party leadership is, which is predominantly in the East Coast and the West Coast, have assumed everybody's alike. Mm-hmm. And issues that resonate in New York or Los Angeles or San Francisco are going to be accepted all over the country. That is not the case. It's not the case with any population, and certainly not with Hispanics in Texas.
Well, let me bring up makes a nice transition into the next topic. So one of the things that some governors along the border regions have done in order to address this issue is, like, East Coast, West Coast people, not everything's around you. We're going to ship people coming across the border to your states, to your homes. Let's talk about the border issue, because that played a big role in politics in Texas last year. And it has for several years. I mean, when was the last time? We haven't, since 1986 was the last time that Congress passed meaningful, significant.
Ronald Reagan signed that bill.
Simpson Mazzoli.
Yeah.
That's right.
So we talked about this earlier. Congress isn't doing much. Is Congress going to move? We've got this Title 42 question coming up. Mm-hmm. The president is the one making. The presidents have been the ones making the decisions on immigration as the enforcement arm of the federal government. Is Congress going to do something?
No.
I agree with Congress hasn't done anything on this issue. There has been movement for the DREAM Act, mm-hmm. which has sat there in Congress for, 20 years?
Our Texas governor at the time, Rick Perry, was and has been a big supporter of the DREAM Act, right? Bring them in through a process.
Yes.
But that
comprehensive immigration reform. I think everybody recognizes that for our technology to keep moving forward, for the country to continue to innovate, we want the best and the brightest from all over the world. Of course, we want to grow our own, but you've got scientists and creative people all over the world. So let's create pathways for them to get here and become part of this country.
Wow, you almost sounded like Ted Cruz. But that's exactly what he says.
Yeah, except that there are people that have been here in this country who are under DACA, who are, basically they're citizens, except they're still
Oh,
not.
we
you
deal
know?
at UHD. We deal with it every day.
Every
right?
single day. That's right.
Right. Well, you have
Every
students come
every
into
university in Texas, California, much of the country, are, have
Yeah.
undocumented that basically they're going on to be lawyers, they're going on to be doctors, they're going to be teachers, social workers.
They're
We've gotta-
undocumented. They don't even know how to speak Spanish, which was the assumption is
Absolutely.
there.
Right.
They don't
Absolutely.
know. The assumption is, let's send them back to their country. They could go back to their country. They couldn't even communicate with anybody in their country.
Folks, nobody believes in the American dream, capitalism, more than immigrants.
Absolutely.
I found that to be the case.
No, that's
And
definitely
it's
the case.
really basic. It's really basic by just looking at the work that they do.
Mm-hmm.
Just look and see, and I'm guessing that almost everybody in the country at one time or another has hired an undocumented worker to do work for them because
Absolutely.
it's good work and it's cheap work, and they do it all the time. And I'll admit my father, who's now passed away, he made his entire living by hiring undocumented workers his entire career. That's how he made a living, is building houses with these people, and he developed relationships with them that were they were like family to us. So that's there, and we see that every day. But when we see pictures on the other side of the border of thousands and thousands of people, and they're going into a city that doesn't have, where you'll have children sitting on the floor in schoolhouses because there's no room for them, you need to do something about that. You need a better system.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, I don't think it's being, and we haven't even talked about human trafficking and drugs and so forth, and COVID transmissions and all that, all the other issues that go with it. But something needs to be done to make it better. The problem is in politics, this is not a good political issue. It doesn't help you. It's like abortion. You don't come out talking about abortion every day because that means half the people hate your guts. And that's the same way with this immigration issue. Donald Trump was the only one who really tackled it, was more than happy to tackle it. And it was it was a surprise to me that he won the presidency because he developed so many people who had a hatred for him and his policies in the process of doing this. So most politicians don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. Something needs to be done, but I don't have any hope.
Let's talk about another issue that is
Just on that though, I think one of the difficulties is how do we deal with the sending countries, because the reality of it is there are more and more immigrants and refugees coming from all over the world, from war, from famine, from dictatorships, from brutality and terrorism, all these other reasons. All of them would love to come to the United States or Europe. We can't accept all of them.
But when they get to the United States, what do they have waiting for them here? They don't have anything waiting. They have a good school system for their kids, but they're not going to be living well. They're not going to be working for high wages. That just tells you how bad it is in their country.
Absolutely.
It's not that this is just paradise when they walk in the door.
It's not just a border issue for the states. It's also a foreign relations issue.
Absolutely.
Because
Yes.
And no one talks about
nobody
that.
talks about that.
And how do we deal with the fact that Venezuela is basically not a state? It's many of these countries are falling apart. Haiti, literally, you've had sections fighting each other.
Yeah.
And
For generations.
and so
forever.
it's exactly, and so that it continues to fuel the many people who leave those countries, and they are looking for shelter and some place to come to. And it may not be the United States, but we've got to address the issues internationally.
Yeah. So one of the other issues, and talking about international, this has an international issue. So one of the big news items, very difficult to talk about, and that's the Uvalde school shooting. Just one example of gun violence that occurs in the United States. And the League of Women Voters has a gun control issue in Texas, a gun control group in Texas, to look at issues and to many of them are gun owners, right? You don't have to be anti-gun to be for responsible gun ownership, right? You don't have to own a gun to think that it's okay for people to own guns. So, this is one of those other things where we think that people are more orthodox than they really are. This crosses issues, this crosses lines. It's not just Republicans who are pro-gun. It's not just Democrats who are anti-gun, right? So what the legislature is now meeting again, and I know that there are bills on the table to restrict 18-year-olds from being able to go down and buy a AR-style gun, and because they're considered long guns, right? But that's not your grandpap's double gauge, double barrel, 12 gauge that you're going to go out
automatic rifle,
hunt ducks. It's a
or a semi-automatic
rifle. Very easily changed into an automatic rifle, though, if you know how to do it. And many people on the street do. So what can we expect from the legislature? What should we expect from the legislature? Because this is a national issue, but it has roots in Texas.
I don't think we can expect anything from the legislature on this as far as serious gun control. I'm one of those people who, when I look at Uvalde and the tragedy of Uvalde.
And you just came from there.
Yeah, I just came here. It's just a gorgeous city, by the way. It's a beautiful city. I mean, it was the first time I went, and it was just surprisingly warm and beautiful. I loved the city when I was there, and it's such a tragedy. But when I looked there, I don't think any legislation that would have passed to control guns would have stopped that. I think this person would have gotten a gun and did what he did, regardless of legislation. I don't think gun control is going to stop this incredible tragedy that we're having in our schools with shootings. I think we need to take big steps to protect our schools better. Big steps. And I see my children go to Atascocita High School. I've seen them take huge steps in protecting the kids. There's one entrance to the school during the day. That entrance is protected with a person behind the glass who says you're in or you're not in. And so if in Uvalde they would not have had that door open on the side, I think we would have a better result. If that he wouldn't be able to come in the front, and if he would have came in the front and did something, he would not nearly done as much damage. So unfortunately, to me, this always comes down to gun control. They always want a gun control bill. Now, as far as I'm concerned, I don't have a problem with limiting guns for people under 21. I don't have a problem with that. I think better gun registration, more control. I don't think it's a bad thing, but I don't think it's going to hit the issue well enough. I don't think it's going to do anything well enough. We need to take bigger steps to protect our kids in our schools, and that means we have to basically seal them in. We have to have police on campus. We have to make sure everybody obeys the rules, and that to me will help a lot more than any gun legislation.
Bill, do we want a police state in the schools, though?
I don't think we want a police, but I do think that we can't depend on the state legislature because of the politics of that is dominant in Texas. I don't think any kind of gun control measures are going to be passed, and it's very possible that they be overturned by the Texas courts. But the other is that I do agree that we've got to harden the schools. When I was president at the University of Houston downtown, I was sort of shocked when we came in, and you could literally, obviously the people get off the train, they could walk across the bridge, come in. There was really no security, and one of the things we did was harden the classrooms and create more safety devices for the faculty and for the students. That can be done and should be done, and the state should pay for that. But the other is that I think, we can't just say, okay, the problem is that it's a mental health issue, and we tend to do that it's an individual, and it has nothing to do with guns. I do think that ultimately we have to look at that, because reality of it is it is very easy to get a gun. In not just by purchasing it, and unfortunately, I mean, I had a rifle when I was 11.
Sure.
And I grew up with guns. You
The
same
Texas
thing.
way, the New Mexico way.
Exactly. So it's not, guns by themselves are not the problem. It's the how you use them and who gets access to them.
Right.
And I really think it's important that we we create a sense of responsibility, because too many people take that gun and start using it with somebody else. And unfortunately, we've seen the number of violence and murders. Uvalde, as tragic as that is, it would be more tragedy if we don't address the situation to make sure there are no future.
We need to take steps.
Right.
Need to protect. Yes.
Okay, so let's talk about two more topics, so about 5 minutes each. And one I know you want to talk about, David, but let's talk about critical race theory. We have been, that's not the one you wanted to talk about.
We were expecting the Astros.
That's coming up. So lawmakers have been concerned about critical race theory being taught in school districts. Most educators say we're not teaching critical race theory. That's a law school, right, a graduate school topic. But I think critical race theory is kind of become kind of an omnibus term. It means a lot of other things that have parents, and it's kind of become the the specter, right, that people are afraid of, and it's the bogeyman that people are calling up right now for other issues that people are concerned about. Some legitimately, others we may take issue with. So over a year ago, October in 2021, Matt Krause, or Krause, that's how I would call it, Fort Worth, Arlington representative, sent out this list of 800 books. Since that time, Texas leads the nation in restricting some 800 titles in 22 districts. In fact, Katy ISD a couple of months ago removed some titles, and they've been having some issues over that because parents are complaining. And this is not a new issue. This, you saw this in the 70s. You saw this in other times in the United States history. The question of banning books in public schools.
I don't think it's a good policy to ban books, whether it's under the title of criticisms about teaching race, or thinking that there's sexuality being taught. I don't think it's a good policy. On the other hand, I do understand that parents have concern. They want to make certain that that they have some say in what is being taught and what their kids are reading. So there is a balance. The problem is it's been tremendously politicized, and we're seeing it in other states where now, for example, in Florida, they're starting to audit every single college and the amount of money that's being spent on whether you're teaching about critical race, whether you're teaching about diversity.
For Texas universities, this is a base year because the legislature's meeting, so this may be an issue for universities as funds are allocated. David, what do you think?
Absolutely think that some books should be banned. I mean, I don't. There are things that children shouldn't read. I mean, go to the extreme. You shouldn't have Playboy magazines in your library. We do it with movies all the time. Rated R, rated PG, rated G. Children under 17 cannot come in unless they're with their parent. So
But you're
yes,
talking
there
more
are
about
things that
age
should be
appropriate.
yes,
Age
age
appropriate
appropriate.
than banning, though, right? Is there a difference?
Well, not to me. I mean, they should be banned for some students, right? Elementary schools should have some books that are banned.
So who makes that decision, though?
Well,
I
the
mean,
parents should have be a part of it. I think I think parents should have the power to say, look,
so do
this
you
is
support
sexually
the
explicit.
the 800 books? I mean, have
Oh, I
you looked
haven't
at those?
read those.
Yeah, but that's basically what you're saying, David.
But that's part of the
No.
problem, right? Is that it's like somebody sends out a list and they go, okay, these, I have 201 names of known.
You have to go through them, right?
You know,
Right,
You have to go through them. So, yeah, I don't think Bill and I really disagree that much.
No,
I just think there are certain things I didn't want my kids to read when they were 5 and 6 years old.
absolutely.
They're 18 now. I don't mind if they read those things, but in schools you have to watch it because it's very easy with the massive amount of books that you're talking about. You said there's a whole list.
Yeah.
Well, maybe there's 6 or 7 in there that don't belong, and the kids shouldn't be reading, and I think it's an issue. So. Yeah, I'm for banning certain books. I think you should look at it closely, and I think parents should be involved. The parents should say, "Look, I don't like this book," and if school board member isn't going to know what's in there, superintendent isn't going to know what's in there. They didn't know it was sexually explicit.
Right.
Thank you for letting me know, so we can take it off the shelf.
Well, the difficulty though is that there's a long list that's being distributed all over the state of Texas to ban these books,
Right.
and most of the people that are saying, yeah, ban them. But I haven't read them. I haven't looked at them. But
they
they're
don't,
on the list.
They don't have the power to ban them. Elected officials do.
Right.
So it's okay to say, okay, why do you want it banned? Tell me what you're reading that you want banned. This thing. We're a group that want to ban books. Now, you got to have some legitimacy.
Speaking of bans, it really has nothing to do with it. But speaking of talking about cans, let's talk about cans. This past year, the Houston Astros won their second World Series.
Mm-hmm.
The first one was marred by the specter of whether or not, I don't even know if the cheating scandal, right? That they were beating the can to let them know what pitch was coming.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the case this time, right? So a
Not yet.
legitimate win. Have they justified themselves? Have they proved themselves?
I don't think they had to justify themselves the first time. I mean, we have proof that there was a cover-up of the New York Yankees cheating scandal. The Boston Red Sox did it the next year. Nobody said anything about that. What this is picking on Houston. They're picking on Houston because they won. They don't like the Astros. That's what it was. They didn't have to re-justify it. Everybody knew. If you watched the World Series against the Dodgers, you knew there was no cans getting beat. There was no cans getting beat during the playoffs. It was a streak that was going on during the regular season. And Jose Altuve, the guy they boo more than anybody, after 2 times with the can said, I don't want to hear that can anymore. And they never did it again.
Right.
I mean, this is absurd. It's baseball. People represent cities, so they can hate us all they want. But we're still the champions 2 times.
I think David has been more passionate about this discussion than the other ones we've talked about.
Well, I was an Astro fan first in 1969. I'm old.
Well, I've got to tell you that when I watched every game and I rooted for the Astros all along the way. It really upset me watching the national news and they would ask that question. Do you think that this has finally rid the Astros of that cheating case? And it just would drive me crazy.
Well, at least there was pretty much consensus that, yeah, it has.
Yeah, exactly.
Look, they're a great team. They've been in 6 straight ALCS championship games. They've been to 4 World Series in the last 6 years, 2 championships. They're a really good team.
And what a great icing on Baker's cake.
Absolutely.
That Dusty Baker, I think he was on a winning team 25 years ago.
He was on winning teams his entire career.
But as manager, this is his first
He's
win.
been, his first World Series win.
World Series win.
Great.
Yeah, World Series win, of
His
course.
first World
victory
Series win.
for
He had
him. For
successful
a
teams
great
many
guy.
years. He when he was a player with the Dodgers and the Braves, he was a great player on great teams. with the Dodgers and the Braves, and so he went on to manage. Personally, I don't think he's a great manager, but I mean, it is good to see somebody who's devoted their career to baseball to have success in the end.
And the Astros are only going to get better because they've got strength. They've got a lot of young guys they've got talent, and they've got a lot of talent.
And their farm teams, yeah.
Through the farm teams.
I wish their farm team was a little better, but yeah.
Well, so I do want to say this about the Astros too, is that I've been really impressed. Unlike you two fellows, I've not lived in a town with a professional baseball team before. So I am impressed, and it's not just the Astros, but with the other sports teams, how much they give back to the community that supports them.
Absolutely.
Bill Flores, David Branham, I want to thank you very much for your comments as we look back on 2022 and look forward to what's going to happen in 2023. And I hope that we're still smiling and that we have good news about our Houston Astros again when we do this again in a year. And I do want to say that apparently nobody disagreed with you because we didn't have any call-ins to challenge our statements, so that's always good. The nice thing about these two gentlemen, besides the fact that I've known them for so long and that we've always been good friends and we've always had conversations like this, is that all of us are League of Women Voters of Houston members. And that's what we're about. That's what we're going to be looking forward to this year is what's the league going to be up to. We have a new executive director, a brand new executive director at the league, and we'll hopefully have her on the show here in the future. So I want to say Happy New Year, Merry Christmas, as I haven't seen you since then, both to you, Bill, to you, David, and to you out there. Thank you for joining us on the show, guys.
Public affairs, public access.
Mark is on.
Mark had to say it. Public affairs, public access.
Mark, you should have your microphone on all the time.
You could be the third person for Houston Media Source TV, the public affairs, public access for the League of Women Voters. I'm Gene Preuss. Have a good evening. Happy New Year.